All right, today I am going to respond to a video from Answers in Genesis, and Answers in Genesis got tired apparently of just giving answers for Genesis, and they wanted to respond to a skeptic like me who says that there are contradictions in the Christmas story. Specifically, I'm just going to focus on one from this video. So Matthew says that Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great, which ended around 4 BC. Luke chapter 1 says that Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great, which ended around 4 BC. And then Luke chapter 2 says that Mary and Joseph went down to Bethlehem because of a census under the governor Quirinius, who came in at 6 CE, and Herod the Great's son ruled for a little bit in between there. So there is really obviously a contradiction here, but Answers in Genesis decided that they are going to fix it. So let's see what they said. I'm going to watch this and react.
There are no contradictions. We just have to read things carefully. So skeptics also claim that there's a contradiction in Luke chapter 2 because they claim that Luke wasn't a very good historian. So Luke...
Can I just say that I don't like necessarily being called a skeptic all the time? I love Christmas. I love this whole time of year, and seeing a contradiction here hasn't ruined that for me, and I'm still a Christian. But anyway, let's let Dan talk for a second.
Is placing Jesus' birth nowhere near 6 CE when Quirinius conducts his census of Judea.
They'll say that he named the wrong governor of Syria. Let me read that passage. It's Luke 2, beginning with verse 1. We're going to read the first 4 verses. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went up to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David.
I like the music.
Here's the problem, according to the skeptics. Quirinius didn't become the governor of Syria until AD 6 or 7, and of course, Jesus was born several years before that. A lot of times we think he was probably born around 5 BC. So,
also, this is not a problem according to the skeptics. This is a problem according to history. Let's keep going.
So how could Quirinius be the governor of Syria in 5 BC if he didn't become the governor of Syria until 6 AD?
To me, the most simple explanation for this has always just been Luke messed up, but they're going to bend over backwards to try to explain why Luke did not make a mistake.
There are 3 plausible solutions to this, and I'm going to give them to you, I think, weakest to strongest. So this first one I don't think is really a great solution, but some people have proposed that Luke's phrase, where he says that it took place while Quirinius governing Syria, could be translated as before Quirinius governed. But there are a lot of Greek experts who say that that solution is highly improbable. So I don't think that we should lean on that one.
So just to respond to that, because I do think it's highly unlikely, but it's also something a lot of people still say to me. So I just want to explain really quickly why this doesn't work by using a little bit of Greek. Now, in this Greek image here, they actually have the wrong word highlighted. This egeneto just means it happened. It is, it's in the aorist tense, it's like a past tense. So this isn't actually the word before. The word here is prote. So I'm going to jump to another screen where I can show you a little bit of how the Greek argument works here. Okay, so he says this explanation isn't very convincing, but it's still one I hear a lot. So I want to just make kind of a reference to it and explain what the argument actually is. So this word here in the Greek, prote, in this case is an adjective, and this adjective means first. So what we are seeing here, of te apographe prote, so these 3 words, you see they all ended in this letter, eta. That's a Greek letter, and that actually is a clue that these 3 words go together. So this is actually saying this first census, or you could read it a slightly different way and read it as this census was first. Either way works. Either way is okay. This was the first sentence. So prote can sometimes mean before. So sometimes an apologetic argument that people like to make is that there was a census before the census under Quirinius. So this is actually referring to a totally different census. Now, there are a bunch of reasons why this doesn't work, both historically and logically and grammatically. Historically, Romans didn't tax client kingdoms, almost unheard of. There's one case that apologists lean on really heavily, but it wasn't a common practice to tax client kingdoms. And this census was for the purpose of taxation. You'd also have to wonder if the census apparently happened under Herod, a client king, and the Romans, there was a first census, then why would there be a second one under Quirinius? And Josephus even says that this second census under Quirinius sparked a revolt. So why would people revolt about a census if there had been one 10 years earlier? So if we're imagining historical evidence for this before census, it really doesn't make sense. But the reason it doesn't make sense grammatically is actually because of this phrase right here. So this word here, hegemoniantos, is what's called a participle in Greek. So in English, a participle is like walking, driving. That's a participle. So it's similar in Greek, except that participles in Greek have a little bit more time baked into them. So this literally has time baked into it. And it literally means, right here, it has a sense of ongoing action. So while Quirinius was governing Syria, So this word here that they highlighted, it happened while Quirinius was governing Syria. So even if you tried to say this as like, this census happened before, if I translated this census happened before, and then I would have to say it happened while Quirinius was governing Syria. So it just doesn't make any sense. It opens up a whole bunch of grammatical errors and problems. So the people who make this argument, and there are still a lot of them because I see it literally every time I make a video about this verse, they can't actually fix it this way. But let's go back to the argument. Just if the Answers in Genesis team is watching this, they should have highlighted this word, prote. But anyway, let's keep going.
Translated as before Quirinius governed. But there are a lot of Greek experts who say that that solution is highly improbable. So I don't think that we should lean on that one. The second plausible solution is that Quirinius might have governed Syria twice, of course, in AD 6 or 7, beginning then, and possibly prior to that. We do have an inscription that was found talking about a man who governed Syria twice, and once was during the reign of Augustus. So that would fit Quirinius pretty well if he actually governed Syria twice. The reason we can't be confident on this one is because in the inscription, the man's name is missing.
It's actually a little more than just that the man's name is missing, although it is. It's also about who actually fits the historical details of this inscription. And most historians who have looked at this, with the exception of a few very early ones, because early people were still looking, thinking Luke was historical and trying to find like the evidence that matches. But most modern historians who have looked at this agree that the evidence doesn't really fit with Quirinius. So let me see if I can throw up an English translation of this inscription up on the screen. So here it is. We have the king, which the aforementioned tribe may be. This translate, I'll link to it below. I appreciate the scholar who shared this translation. Having been brought into the power of probably Caesar, Augustus, and the Roman people, the Senate probably decreed 2 thanksgivings for successful achievements and triumphal ornaments to himself. As proconsul, he held the province of Asia. For another time, he held Syria and Phoenicia. So apparently this is the second time this person is governing Syria. Now, remember, this all stems from a need to try to explain why Quirinius governed twice, which we don't really have any reason to expect from any of the other evidence. But if we want to believe that's true, which, people clearly do, we'd have to make this evidence fit. Now, there have been a lot of reasons proposed why this doesn't actually really fit the evidence. During the time in question, we actually know sort of what Quirinius was doing. Quirinius was fighting the Homonedensian War during this time, which happens over here. Let me show it on a map. So quite far away, and he wasn't actually fighting a king. So this inscription doesn't actually seem to be referring to anything Quirinius was doing, especially not at this time. Now, some people will argue that maybe he was based in Syria while he was doing this, but there was another governor of Syria. Like, we know who were the governors of Syria during this time, and it just doesn't really fit with Quirinius. The inscription also says that there will be 2 public thanksgivings, which would be decreed by the Senate. And this actually implies that there were 2 different campaigns, and Quirinius only fought 1 campaign during this time. And I will leave a link below to some of these papers for those of you who really want to nerd out a little bit more about this inscription. And again, we know who the governors of Syria are during this time. Josephus gives pretty good records of it, so we know that Quirinius wasn't a governor of Syria during this time. But this is going to bring us to the next argument. So let's wrap up this one. But just to say that this inscription doesn't really fit. And if you start by twisting what Luke actually says and then go looking for pseudo-evidence to fit with that twist, you kind of, I think some people could make this work and it might make them feel better that they are doing pseudo-history. But the fact is, this just isn't what the history says. You have to twist Luke and then try to come up with this inscription as justification for your twisted interpretation of Luke. And it's not even clear that it does that well or properly or whatever. But let's keep going.
We don't want to have an argument for silence here, but if it was Quirinius, then there we would have evidence that he did do that. So there would be
no. If it was, we would have that.
On that. The third one I think is probably the best solution. That is, Luke actually doesn't say that Quirinius was the governor of Syria. Luke uses a verb there that Quirinius was governing Syria. So the actual governor was a guy named Quintilius Varus, but he was a pretty weak leader. And so Quirinius was sent to oversee that whole region, even though he didn't actually have the title of governor at that point. So Luke was telling us that Quirinius was governing, he was overseeing that area, even though he wasn't actually the governor.
So just to point out that he says that with a lot of confidence, we don't actually have any evidence that Quirinius was sent to oversee this. Again, this stems from your trying to make Luke true. And again, I think the most obvious reason is Luke made a mistake. But let's look a little bit at the text here. Again, we'll come back to our Greek text right here. Okay, so we already dealt with the word prote. In this case, we're going to deal with this word, hegemon. Now, we get the English word hegemony from this. And it's true that this word isn't a technical title for a governor. This is a verb that does mean like governing or overseeing, but it's stronger than just overseeing. Like it's stronger, it is actually like a governing type role. And the fact is that this, again, is just trying to wiggle out of this by trying to find enough wiggle room in the language to make it make sense. We don't have any evidence that Quirinius was a hegemon of this region in any other capacity. We know he was off fighting a war somewhere, and people will argue, well, he was based in Syria. Maybe. We don't have evidence for it. We don't have evidence other than the fact that you want to make Luke not make a mistake. So trying to wiggle through this just doesn't really seem to me like a very honest way to approach historical sources. So to me, I get painted as a skeptic in this. Oh, let's put the Christmas music back on so that I'm not. Okay. So to me, I get painted as a skeptic, but the problem is, who's actually being a skeptic? Just read what the text says. Don't come up with 100 different ways to try to wiggle out of it and try to find historical evidence that matches you wiggling out of it, trying to make it make sense to fit with your modern presupposition that the Bible has to be the inerrant word of God. It's not. This is probably a mistake. If we get better evidence, better something that, somehow makes this make sense, I'll be the first to say, great. This is one of many contradictions in the Gospels that wouldn't be a contradiction in that case. But as of right now, for all we know, it's a contradiction and you can't fix it.
So there are 3 plausible solutions to this issue, and we really only need one of them to be correct.
That's true, but we don't have any evidence that any of them are correct, just to be clear.
You can find the solution by looking closely at the biblical text.
I really wish that they would look closely at the biblical text. That would be fantastic, actually reading it and seeing what the Bible actually says for people who claim to love the Bible, because you wouldn't have to bend over backwards to try to explain something that's clearly, obviously, just a simple error. Now, again, I don't like being painted as a skeptic. I'm just somebody who loves the Bible and reads the Bible and sees what it actually says. I also love Christmas. I'm not trying to ruin it for anybody. Just because there's a contradiction between these 2 stories doesn't mean it's not a beautiful story that is meaningful for me, wonderful at this time of year. I hope you love Christmas too. Who doesn't love Christmas? Christmas is amazing. But in any case, the most obvious explanation for this is still that Luke made a mistake. And that's okay. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. If you like this video, you should check out this other one on 5 gospel contradictions scholars know. Check it out.